Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. For you to give up a summer afternoon from either your research or just hanging out in the nice weather is really a sacrifice, and I appreciate it. So I'm Stephen Kelts, and I'm here to tell you today about some progress that we've made implementing some pilot implementations of integrated ethics assignments, lectures, and other things for computer science classes, um, but also to talk about the promise that we expect in the future, as hopefully I'm able to work with more computer science faculty, basically helping you to figure out ways that it actually supplements the material of your class, right? The motto that I've adopted for myself, and it's actually on my final slide, is better technologists. I don't want to come into computer science classes and give you ethics lectures. Now, if that's what you want, if you want a lecture about Kant, I've been doing that my whole life, and I've been glad to actually give more, right? Impromptu lectures, right? The New York Times referenced like a certain chapter in Machiavelli today, and I just went down a rabbit hole. It was, who's that? Is it John McWhorter, the linguist at Columbia who writes for the New York Times? Yeah, at the end of his thing, he referenced a chap, and I went down the rabbit hole. I was reading Machiavelli again, and I was just in my element. So, hey, if you want it, I got it. But in terms of working on this integrated ethics program, my objective is to fit seamlessly into your classes in ways where the ethics and social responsibility content of what I help you develop actually helps to create better technologists, actually sharpens their technical skills, but also better technologists in the sense that they're better able to talk with their peers on their development teams as they head out from here about what they want the technology actually to accomplish in terms of the user's needs, the user's good, and so on and so forth. So can we make them more technically capable at the same time as we're making them more capable about speaking about the social impact of technology and then affecting their workplace? If we could do both of those things, then I'd have lived up to my motto, better technologists, right? Now, a lot of us know, a lot is a significant understatement. All of us know about some of the problems that we're actually thinking about here. We're trying to train students to circumvent in some ways, right? Problems of bias, our own Juha Benjamin, problems of overtrust in systems. The Brookings study there about an enrollment algorithm, which actually optimized financial aid to increase enrollment, but it optimized financial aid actually by assigning it almost all to freshmen and sophomores, because once students had sunk costs, they were juniors and they were seniors, the algorithm discovered from the data that you could withdraw their financial aid from them and they'd stay enrolled in school or whatever. And so if the algorithm had a voice, it would say, but I did what I was asked to do. I optimized for enrollment. But it did it in a way that violated another value. We know about de-anonymization studies. Arvind is right here. Breaches of security, safety online, the effects on people's autonomy. And if you've been paying attention over the past 15 years to some of the social effects of especially information and communication technologies, especially coming out of Silicon Valley, you might be saying to yourself, man, we need to get an ethicist in here and give those students some ethics lectures, right? Now, I don't want to talk myself out of a job, but, or at least ethics lectures don't work in the way that an ethicist would think they do. If we think that by speaking to the students about values and speaking to them about how we reason to certain values is itself automatically going to transform what they do in their computing work, then I think that we're wrong about that. And one of the ways that we know that is that there have been countless studies on ethics classes themselves asking, is there substantive view change from this ethics class? Or in other words, is the student more likely to endorse not eating meat after they've heard Peter Singer's philosophy of not eating meat, right? There have been studies on behavior as well. So I think it was at the University of San Diego or the University of California, San Diego. They did a study that actually looked at, the students actually connected their prox cards or whatever they call them there to this study. And they looked at the question of whether or not they actually consumed less meat, regardless of whether or not they were expressing that they weren't going to eat more meat, right? studies like this that look for view change and behavior change almost always say that there is no such thing, not from an ethics class. And interestingly, that one that studied behavior did suggest that the students who had taken this specific module on Peter Singer were less likely to eat meat. Right. So there's one bright spot if you're hoping for ethicists to change the world, but I'm not really sure that we would or should hope for ethicists to change the world by dint of their lectures alone, because the data tends to suggest that there isn't that type of change. Right. Now, what good could we get from an ethics lecture? Well, one thing is if you're looking at case studies sometimes called, or looking at specific horror stories from the past, there may in fact be a need for that sort of awareness, right? As I like to say, history doesn't repeat itself, but it really does rhyme. So sometimes you need to know something about past horror stories in order to identify aspects of your particular current technology or your particular use case that might be problematic down the line. That might help, right? I've worked with Bob Nondero's students this semester on ethical impact assessments and speaking with them. I brought up the Space Shuttle Challenger and I was like, what? You know, like they looked at me like, what are you talking about? Well, there was this thing that happened. O-rings, have you heard of them? But forget about it. I mean, they may barely know case studies before even 2019. So some of those things, right, may be necessary, right? But future problems may in fact be different than past ones in ways that I'll talk about in just a second. And cases don't necessarily, students would always say to me when I would do tech ethics lectures back in the teens here at SPIA, right? Computer science students would come to me and they'd say, but you're not telling me actually technically how that problem was caused, and you're not giving me any tools to do anything about this, right? That was a wake-up call for me, because all I really knew was the horror stories at the time as well. So if we give them just horror stories, we're not pinpointing the technical or organizational origin of the problem. In the Challenger instance, it was an organizational problem. And we're not telling them how to deploy their learned tech skills to solve that problem. Right? So horror stories can be good, but they have these limitations. Reasoning for situations of conflict, right? That's really what an ethics lecture gets you to. How do you reason to a particular conclusion, right? But we really only need that reasoning in those instances of conflict, when there's equally important values that we need to weigh against each other. What is precisely the reason for this value? When there are different developers on the team who might have different visions of what is right or what is good for this technology, right? I've worked with teams at Google through a current Google employee who was previously a CITP fellow named Ben Zevenberg. I've worked at teams at Google where they've ground to a standstill because they can't agree on the direction for the development of a particular product, right? And how it would affect users, whether it's a good thing to do, and et cetera. And also there could be clashes with the user's vision of what's right or good. Right. So I'm not saying students don't need some ethics. I don't want to talk myself out of a job. But I am saying, let's limit the applicability. Let's have a conscious awareness of the limited applicability of what a specific ethics lecture can do, right? And let's think also instead about other ways in which computing students need to know and apply socially responsible computing and ethical values. Here's a development challenge that's often mentioned by people who found themselves in hot water before. For instance, Asa Raskin, a person credited with the invention of infinite scroll, right, frequently says, I just didn't know that it would have this addictive propensity to it. I believe he sold his company to Instagram, and I believe that's where they got infinite scroll. But I just didn't know. It was unanticipated to me that that would be the social effect of simply loading up more pictures as the user was waiting and scrolling through, right? So you see many examples here of unforeseen risks, unanticipated consequences of technology, unintended consequences as well, right? So a question we might have for ourselves is, in those instances where what we really need a computing student to do is be able to anticipate the potential future wrongs, right? What skills would we teach them? How would we get them to that place, okay? There are many proposed solutions like this framework. There are many ethical technology assessment frameworks out of Dutch universities in particular. They happen to be particularly good at technology assessment. literature and a lot of smart stuff. But you see the proposed solution here is a framework that walks the developer through a process. You first have to anticipate the problem that may occur, right? You have to be awake to that. Then you apply reflexivity to think about the reasons for your own actions. Ideally, you think broadly, inclusively about what the effect of the technology is going to be across many different stakeholders and potentially many different countries when you're thinking about, say, a technology that Google would roll out. And then there's also a skill this framework suggests in responsiveness. It's not enough to think these will be the effects, or let me ask what the effects would be in your particular social situation, but you also have to have the skill and the strength in a lot of ways to respond to those concerns as well, right? That's a different sort of moral motivation, right? But here's the other development challenge that's that developers frequently talk about as well. Depending upon the corporate structure in which they are situated, they may have anticipated a problem. They may have reflected on any conflict of values. They may have included many voices. Right? They may have actually developed the intention to be responsive to those user needs, and they're thwarted by their boss. Right? And not only that, but organizational psychology would tell us that oftentimes our intentions to behave can themselves be lessened or dampened, which means, working backward through the process, that even our judgment about those things might be lessened or dampened because we've been thwarted by the organizational structure that we're a part of. Right? In other words, I don't even think it's that wrong anymore. What I previously thought was wrong, what I anticipated would be the effect of my technology, I don't even think it's that wrong anymore, simply because in the social situation that I've been placed in, my attempt to behave or my intent to behave has been thwarted in some ways. These are thought of as certain blindnesses that people develop within corporate environments. Okay, so if those are all the problems, if ethics lectures isn't going to do the whole thing, but we can situate ethics lectures as doing something in the life cycle of an engineer out there who's trying to do the right thing through their work, right? But it's not going to do everything, right? Then what would the journey of a student be to learning all of the things that I just mentioned? Well, they should be learning cases. They should be learning something about the past, right? A drawback there, of course, is that past cases are already labeled. We already know what the wrong is. We already might actually even know what the organizational difficulty was that thwarted those actors, the Challenger case, right? We might know the technical fix for these things, right? These cases are labeled for them already. Nothing wrong with that per se, but these cases are labeled already. The problem is we want them to anticipate new wrongs, sometimes the same, but oftentimes new wrongs, harms, social bads, right? In cases that are not labeled, right? And so I developed, some of you have had them in your classrooms, these agile ethics role plays, where the students actually role play as the members of a development team, and they face a real world case exactly as the engineers faced it, where they're looking, in a particular round of the game, they're looking only at a technical choice that they have to make, where there's given no indication at all of what the future ethical or social wrong from that might be. And they've got to try to discern, where did this wrong occur? What in this process led to a bad outcome? And I don't even tell them, I give them a fake name to a company, et cetera. At the end, only at the end do I tell them, yeah, this is a Google development team that developed an algorithm called Dermassist. That's one example that we use, right? So they've got to role play through and try to figure out what they would do when the labels aren't given to them, when they're not told ahead of time. Yeah.
Hey, so one question I have is, there's a labeling issue, but then there's, I think I've read it in your materials, even being aware that there is an ethically salient choice being made.
Yeah.
As far as in a critical situation. But in your case, they know they're in an ethics role play. So I was just wondering if that's even possible.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good one. Right. So they're already given, they're told you're coming in for agile ethics or something like that. But I think that the end result of the role play is frequently that the students say things like, if you had only listened to me in round 2, or they reflect and they see that they did not really see the problem sort of coming, right? So they're able to situate that their experience tells them they need to have their radar up more and earlier. And I actually have data on that, which I'll get to in a second, but I think that's exactly the right question, right? How are we actually allowing them to like get that radar up and realize that they're in morally fraught situations? The cognitive psychology of that is to say that people primarily act from scripts, right? They just don't activate ethically relevant scripts unless something in their environment triggers that for them, right? You're on the street in New York City, you ordinarily go to the hot dog stand, you put down your $5, it's just rote, it's just habit. One day, you just don't put down your $5, you realize it's still in your hand, you're walking away, now you realize, well, now you're in an ethically relevant situation. And it doesn't mean you won't just keep walking. Maybe I'll pay the guy tomorrow, or maybe I got away with it, or whatever. But a new script gets kicked in, and you're now thinking about this in a new way. A realization occurs there. People do need, I think, as an ethicist, I'll defend ourselves. People do need some experience also with reasoning as well. Do they have ideas where they can reason in a context of disagreement, as I said? But really important for a computer science department, I think, is can the student deploy the various technical skills that they have learned to actually solve an ethical problem as they've seen it emerge in a technology and et cetera. And I'm going to talk about specific implementations that we've done in classes of people in this room that work on that specific issue. And then are they at least aware as they head out into industry of the ways in which they might be thwarted in their workflow, that it's difficult to act amid the pressures of work and so on and so forth, and that they need to be conscious of the way that work environment can actually change who they are, even change their views, as I said before. Okay? So to work on all these things, we've piloted different things over the course of the past 18 months. Some of the role plays go back a solid 3 years now, right? And all of these are evidence-backed techniques. Now, I'm saying that, but I'm not going to go through all of the studies and et cetera. I'll answer questions about it, right? So you should feel a little skeptical like I feel when I go to my doctor and the doctor says, this is an evidence-backed treatment for this or whatever. I'm like, I don't know, right? That word gets invoked a lot, right? But what really is the evidence for it? I want you to question me on that later, right? But we've researched these, we've worked on these here and et cetera, and we'll see in a second, I gathered some data on some of these, right? And I'm going to walk you through what we've done implementing solutions to help the students learn how to reason to ethical choices, to integrate into technical assignments so that they're learning how to use their skills to solve an ethical or social problem, so that they're learning from the role plays how to get their radar up and realize that they're in a difficult ethical situation, right? So that they're assessing the future impact of their technology through a standard or accepted method for ethical impact, right? And so that sometimes they're hearing standalone ethics lectures as well. Now, I'm not here to actually present this paper, but I do want to tell you that we have implemented a number of these solutions in a SPIA class for a number of years, actually. And we did study it using a tool called the Regain framework, which we developed ourselves here at Princeton. And the data about the effects of these different interventions is strong. Now, we weren't actually looking at technical integration because I don't teach coding, right? So we weren't actually teaching students how to solve these things using their coding skills or whatever, but we were doing the role plays and et cetera, et cetera. We were making them aware of organizational psychology. We're doing all these things, right? And what we found applying this framework, this paper comes out next month, right? We found that by walking them through this new type of ethics class, really, that doesn't really focus on the lectures about Kant or Peter Singer even, right? It has them, but doesn't focus on them so much. The students' reasoning went up. Green arrows are statistically significant results, right? Their students' reasoning went up and their intuition went down. Their use of intuition to solve problems went down, right? Their moral awareness, as hypothesized, went up in certain instances, right? This wasn't a slam dunk of a statistical result, right? But what we did to test moral awareness was we gave them unlabeled cases, right, and labeled cases, right, but specifically unlabeled cases. And we asked, did the students who had gone through a tech ethics class with all of these interventions, were they able to look at an unlabeled case where nothing about ethics or a moral problem or a social problem at all was mentioned? Were they able to actually look at that instance and say, you know, right, I'd seek further information before I acted on this? Were they more likely to do that than the average Princeton student? Yes. Statistically significant, more likely to do that. Were they more likely to say, I'd want to talk to some experts about this before I moved any further with the development of this? This is an unlabeled case, right? Yes, they were more likely. Were they more likely to seek diverse perspectives, as that framework for anticipatory development was talking about earlier? Yes, they were more likely to seek diverse perspectives. Now, directionally, the home run piece of data did move in the direction that we anticipated, but it just wasn't a statistically significant result. We only had 60-some respondents. We're looking at implementing this at other schools as well to see if the same effect occurs. But the thing we really wanted to move was their recognition that unlabeled cases are morally fraught, sort of in general, as a composite measure. Again, it moved directionally the way we wanted, just wasn't a statistically significant result. And then could they handle system complexity, right? Again, a bit of a mixed bag, right? But largely, yeah.
So number 2, bullet point, sub bullet point 1, sub bullet point 2, the information seeking expert opinions diverse perspectives. In the assessment, did they stop at, I don't know, we had to ask them, or did they actually have to go do the steps of asking someone to listen?
Yeah, that's right. It's a Qualtrics survey. So the only thing we could capture from them was what they could do right there at their computer doing the survey. So it was just an expressed intention to seek these.
The results that you're presenting here,
who has decided not to trust themselves as much. Yeah.
generally it's just reduced the socket, but no ability to make decisions.
Oh, so we looked at their relative prioritization of their ethical values and the social norms of the tech development sector around them. And the motion there, we think, is I think it helps to answer that question. That is that while they came to perceive that maybe the tech development process around them was more likely to thwart the enactment of values, they were more committed to their own social values. That's the best we can do, I think.
Values distinct from trust their ability to make moral choices. In fact, maybe universally proportional to it.
Yeah. So confidence, and that actually is found in a lot of the studies of ethics classes as well, that you may see reasoning go up, and if student confidence also goes up, you can attach that actually to the specific students who just now are much more vociferously defending the same opinion they had before the class, right? So you've taught them debate, right? And so we wanted to specifically measure that. We hypothesized that under certain interventions, again, telling them about system complexity, their confidence in themselves would go down at the same time as their reasoning went up, and their perception of their values with respect to the values of other, right? Their perception of their values would go up while their awareness of the difficulty of enacting them would go down, or they would perceive it to be more difficult. Now, I think maybe that's not asking, it's not answering exactly your question, but it was how we tried to look at it. Yeah. Okay. So again, I'm talking to a bunch of different schools right now about implementing it, this measure also at their schools as well. But some evidence we have that these interventions have the hypothesized effect, right? Okay, so what have we done here on campus, right? So reasoning to ethical choices. 2 assignments that we did in Marcel's summer class last summer, which, you know, we can talk about the effects of them, but I just want folks to know about them so they can consider these as options for their class, right? To reason to ethical choices, we had an assignment about conditionals, right? And it was implementing a color contrast measurement, right? They used WCAG Web Accessibility Guidelines, right? And they were merely pulling data out, as it were, right? And if the measurement of the color contrast between two colors was above or below some threshold, it output some result, right? But then we gave them an assignment in their README that they handed in with this, which was to actually look at the WCAG guidelines, to look at a specific section of the ethics of it and talk about why they might want to implement, right? What would it actually do for people with color blindness or visual difficulties or whatever? What would it do for them to make sure that they implemented this check, right? And one of the challenges that we were facing there, and I can get back to this a number of times, one of the challenges we wanted to face here is that across all implementations of embedded ethics or other programs at other computer science departments, the one thing that people frequently say is, yeah, but I don't know how I would do that in just like a conditionals assignment, or I'm really just teaching loops, right? I'm really just teaching a basic, graph search algorithm or something like that. Like, I don't know how ethics and social reasoning really would play in to this, right? So in a lot of our implementations, we've been like, no, let's go actually at the most basic skills and show the students how, even as they are doing this, they are not just doing a homework assignment, they are affecting the world around them, right? So we have reflections on what we did there, but also later on, there was an input-output assignment about privacy and anonymization, right? So the assignment, I think, had previously been about taking a chart that really just labeled fruits, right? It was a spreadsheet that had labels for fruits and et cetera. It was a toy example. We changed it into an example of health data, actually. And we talked with the students about re-identifying the people who are part of this health data. Would that be possible using the skills that you have? Given that it's possible using the skills that you have, how private do you think data really is, and et cetera? I gave them a lecture about 3 concepts of privacy because, again, ethics lectures are mostly useful when there's a conflict of values, right? So I always give competing stances. I gave them a lecture about this. We did in-class case studies, right? What if this sort of information were revealed about a person by this person here? How would you reason your way through it using these 3 concepts? And then we gave them both an opportunity to reflect on the assignment that they had done, de-anonymizing this database, and an exam question about this as well, right? And I'll say, although I don't have sophisticated colored arrows, they weren't very sophisticated, right? I don't have colored arrows, but Marcel and I can talk about it later. The results are good. It achieved what we wanted to achieve with the students. And we found indeed that even just with one lecture about privacy, they were making sophisticated arguments about it in their assignment and their final, right? Integrated assignments, right? And this is a challenge I really wanted to take on. And I learned life's lesson again, careful what you wish for. Because Matt will tell you, this was tough for me. I was working specifically with his strategy design assignments, and we were trying to add new, more technically complicated strategy elements to this class. This is the class Economics of Computing. So he's having his students look at strategery, right? Looking at game theoretic situations and actually algorithmically work their way through solutions to this. So we were complicating his existing assignments by adding on a new strategic element to them. Right? So the students had to do actually more using their economics and computational skills, but then also had to reflect on the comparison of his previous examples and this example. Would that be a good thing to implement this new algorithm? Who would the social groups be who would be affected by this? We asked them in each one, would you feel comfortable implementing this? And we gave them a basic set of guidelines about what an ethical answer would look like. So there's no lecture. I'm not in the class taking up any time or whatever. The students ideally didn't even know that I was a part of this class. I would talk to one of the students later in the semester, and she said, this really cool thing is happening in 445. We've got this ethics TA that we can turn to for, I'm like, yeah, that's me. I'm on the Slack. I was answering those. My name's distinct. You didn't recognize? But that's great. I was never in front of the class, whatever. They were just working their way through these problems with guidance provided by us, right? Integrated assignments have actually been studied in a number of places, and I just want to give a shout out to giants whose shoulders I'm standing on, and we have a whole bank of them that I could use across your classes, because I'm telling you about our project pilots, right? But also kind of pitching you on implementing some of these things in your classes, right? So there's a whole bank of assignments that people share across the country, ways in which we can do the same thing for you that we did in Matt Weinberg's class. I think the best people studying this are at the University of Utah. The lab there that they have on this is like amazing. And the integrated assignments they're developing are fantastic. And I feel no compunction at all about using them, well, because they're releasing them to everybody to use, right? But I'm frequently in contact with them, telling them how happy I am, just ecstatic with the work that they do. They also study these things, right? And line number 1 here is an important part of what I think about integrated ethics, right? They looked at an integrated ethics assignment. They did A/B testing. Not everybody in the class got the integrated ethics assignment, and they were looking at whether there was a difference in the technical learning between students in the 2 different implementations, and whether there was a difference in their ethical reflection. Statistically significant result. It at least did not deprove or reduce their technical learning, and statistically not significant, but it seemed to also make them more comfortable with ethical argumentation as well. Results out of other schools suggest it may lead to the persistence of broader groups of technologists as well. Students who would otherwise not persist in CS, right, may in fact persist if there's an implementation that shows them, look, these things, technical skills that you're learning, these are what you will use to solve social problems. You're doing it right now, and you will do it soon. University of Toronto has found that students who went into their first internships, they have just tons of computer science students across downtown Toronto and Mississauga or whatever, right? So numbers to study. Students who went into a first internship emerged on the other hand, on the other side of that, more likely to actually say that they spotted ethical issues within their work, that they spoke to somebody within their workplace about those ethical issues. More likely if they went through an integrated ethics assignment than other students were. And University of Colorado Boulder, gold standard on some of this stuff. A lot of this work about teaching integrated ethics in engineering actually comes out of civil engineering and the Colorado School of Mines. And a number of those people went over to University of Colorado, and that field of research has developed. Okay. Agile ethics role plays. I said a little bit about these before. Those we've done the most of. The students seem to like them. I do frequently tell a story, which I'll tell because Arvind is in the room. And believe me, I don't actually use your name when I tell this story anywhere else, right? But I remember the first time Arvind had heard about these, and he wanted me to implement one in his classroom. And I walked him through what was going to happen. And he said, and I don't use your name, but I love this moment. Arvind said, so you're going to walk them through the process of making an unethical choice, and you think that they're going to learn from that how to do better? And I'm like, yeah, that's the only answer I have is yeah. But I couldn't say that there was data about it at that time, or et cetera, et cetera. It was based as best I could on studies about role plays, right? But given that the skill we're really working on there is that awareness, those antennas going up, we now have data to suggest that walking them through these choices, letting them see that Google itself, Meta itself, went through this choice, and that it was hard. It was as hard for them as it was for you. You've got to have your antennae up. What's the plural there? You've got to have your antennae up. It really seems to have an effect on the students. So we walk them through a really fast-paced role play to simulate a work environment. New problems emerge in each sprint. Again, they're just given technical choices in each sprint, working on that anticipatory skill, right? Which technical move here might cause the problem, right? They're under real workplace pressures, right? In other words, we actually give them incentives. I now have moved to a system of like dropping a card in front of them in one sprint during the game, and they're like, oh shit, oh, sorry, I'm up for a promotion, and if I don't get it, I won't be able to pay for my kid to go to college, and I have to argue for this, whatever, right? So it simulates real workplace pressures, and believe it or not, you might think, hey, the simulation doesn't do anything. The students report out, man, it's weird. That was just a character, but I felt it. I felt that I needed to argue for this, right? They frequently get blocked by their bosses, right? So a deus ex machina occurs during the game, and it's like the team decided this, but the bosses decided this or whatever, and they express, I felt this sense of estrangement and disappointment, right? Do I want them to feel that? Yeah, turns out I do, right? Because that's working on that skill of understanding their role within system complexity. They learn also a little bit about what an agile development team actually is. So they take a little bit of that away, and it's always a real story. So when I reveal to them at the end and show them web pages and articles about this, they're like, whoa, right? We made the same choices those developers did? Yep, you did. So you got to think about this. And ethical impact assessments, right? I worked in both Adam's class and in Bob Dondero's class, implementing sort of frameworks and codes with these students. So this works in project-based classes. And again, in neither class, well, in Bob's class, I didn't actually take any time in front of the classroom. It was an assignment that they had to do with me outside of the classroom, in which they had a video to work from. My days as a star on TikTok are far, far, far away from me, but the video came out pretty good. And that meant I didn't have to take classroom time, actually. So I introduced them to a framework. In this case, I believe it was from the Responsible Innovation Labs. It was part of their framework. I introduced them to a few principles that they might think through from the ACM Code of Ethics. And I said, when you come to me with your project proposal, right, I want you to have thought about some of the intended and unintended uses of your product, how it will affect users and other people affected by those users. How could it be used by bad actors and so on and so forth, right? So we've done those ethical impact assessments as well. And in a few cases, I've done standalone ethics lectures. I will say, I'm at the very end here, so I'll give myself time for a personal reflection. I have learned a ton in the past 4 years. I'm a different person now than I was, in part because I burst my own bubble about what I thought I had been doing, giving ethics lectures before, right? In part because, as in Matt's class, I was pulling way back on my graduate school education to understand the game theoretic lessons he was giving. I'm like, this is hard. And it's going to be hard as I work on other technical assignments with many of you. So I've learned those things, but how have I changed? I mean, one way I've actually changed is I always heard those computer science students say to me, you're not giving me a real description of how this technology works, right? And they were upset, because I was a fuzzy talking to them about techie stuff or whatever, and I wasn't allowed to judge, right? But I listened to them and I'm like, I think you're right. That is important. Right. And they said, you're not giving me the technical tools to fix this, right? So I have changed in the sense that I don't even think, I was joking earlier that I would give a lecture on Kant at the drop of a hat or whatever, right? But actually, I don't think I would, right? Not anymore, right? So in the standalone ethics lectures that I've given, I've tried to meet the ideal, which is to give them some cases, some horror stories, to talk with them about some principles, but then to say, here are toolkits and so forth, right? I don't know how seriously they take it because, again, I'm a fuzzy talking to the techies, right? But for instance, in Lydia's class, intro to machine learning, right? I was like, I can't finish this lecture without telling you how you should look at things like model cards, right? How you should look at these different tools to assess data and so on and so forth, right? Because these are the things. I'm not just going to talk to you about bias in the data. I'm going to talk to you about different tools that people have developed, what's going on out there in the field for remediation of this, right? So really, I do that not just because it's for CS classes, but because it's the new me. My wife doesn't like the new me any more than the old one, actually. So it mostly affects what I do here at work. But so challenges that we still need to face as we move forward with integrated ethics. Scalable assessment. I actually had no idea how large some of your courses are and how difficult grading actually is and coordinating among graders. Now I do. that's something we're going to have to address. It's just a heck of a lot easier for me as someone experienced in ethics to look at a bunch of one-pagers or whatever. It's a different thing to teach graders to do that. But we worked on some of those things. We developed materials for math class, also did it in Marcel's last summer, and I'm learning my way through that, right? One of the things we found is it's actually easier when there are competing principles. I mentioned that now a couple of times because a lot of times when I talk to people, they're like, wait a minute, ethics lectures don't come to like a conclusion. They just give like competing views on a thing, right? And yeah, that's what we're accustomed to doing. And one of the results that I found, qualitative, not quantitative result, but qualitative result is that when the students are working with competing views, it's actually a lot easier for even an inexperienced grader to look at them and be like, I see an argument there. The two views are clearly stated. I see an argument between them. This looks to me like a well thought out assessment. Another challenge is the implementation of this measurement schema. I really went in some ways back ways around to this vision of integrated ethics by really starting with the cognitive psychology, right? I started with a lot of those questions about what is it that we're looking to affect in the way that students behave, and how can we use tools and materials from engineering ethics, from philosophical ethics, et cetera, to actually move those metrics. So I'd like to have a way to implement that measurement schema over perhaps, of course, a few years of running integrated ethics interventions here in the computer science department, so that we kind of get a sense that it's having the effects that we want to have, right? And people don't want to give classroom time to me. That's cool, right? But I certainly have discovered that. If I were me, I wouldn't want to see me lecture into a class either. But how do I get principled content, which I really do think is quite important? How do I get content about principles, competing principles, ACM principles, et cetera, to students in different classes without taking classroom time? And video is a possible solution to that. Podcasts, other things are things that I'm going to look at. And so with that, I'm going to pause and ask you if there are any questions. But that is our progress so far and our vision for the future of integrated ethics here at Princeton. And my motto, like I said, my commitment is better technologists. So. Yeah, May. Yeah.
When trying to talk about the stuff in class. And I'm sure you have followed them all, so I'll just ask you them all. First off, I tend to focus on teach already. All of their last 6 years of studies, they are primed to think on apply their work, which is what I was trying to fight. So really what I was doing is highlighting that when they make choice, there are certain users that have just helped and certain users that just hurt. And think through how that helps happen. And also that, even though say operating systems was the same 4 years, there's constant choices to make. When exams are extremely design choices that operating systems. They walk away from that really aware that there are implications about usability of their stuff. And based on those choices, and that they already made those choices. And based on our survey, they wind up with really low confidence in their ability to do so. They the three things that we see them coming out of the classroom that I want to fight is one, I shall ask someone else to do this decision because I hear someone else's confidence. Excellent, Laura starts me. Thoughts two, I'm confused by the applications you're not, so to yourself. Second one is that especially when I sort of give your resources, there's a little bit of a tendency to treat that as like the side of the class. So how do we get it to be so deep that we can't control from the ethics track? And the third one, relevant. A lot of them are in operating systems specifically because they ran away from AI and they didn't think about fraud ethical issues.
Right.
So when they hear this front, well, she's an operating system, they're like, I'll just get more technical. There's a way to get technical enough that I don't have to think about this. Like, that's specifically to not think about people. How do I fight that? Not just by saying there's nowhere to hide, but by sort of trying to break down the mental barrier they have around the concept of planning engagements.
Yeah.
So those are my-
I think one of the things they've looked at through qualitative student responses elsewhere is the modeling effect of having the computer science student professor do this. So I made a joke earlier about being in front of the classrooms or whatever. The truth is, it's better if I'm not, right? It's actually better if I create content that the professor, him or herself, can actually work with, right? Because I would say this, I think computing students take you as professors much more seriously than they take us as experts, say on philosophy or something like that. And if you're like, they don't seem to take me that seriously at all, but believe me, it's worse. It can get worse. But the research on the modeling effect, it's qualitative responses or whatever, but although they may not be responding in the moment, saying this has changed how you think about my work, they're taking on board that someone with the technical experience that you have is telling them this is a factor of the work. These are things that happen. The deep integration is, yeah, again, one of the things, that's something that I want to strive towards. One of the things I was proud of in the work with Matt Weinberg is that, again, the students didn't even really know that this extra layer to their homework had been added. They just thought it had always been the case that students were asked to reflect on the social effects of the strategy that they were planning out there. And I think that maybe addressed only two of the things that you.
Like this one was addressed, how do we integrate this one? I think the one that I read was the
Yeah.
It's fine, they're just frustrated that they learned, they walk away more confused. They're very used to classes where they learn like this simple way to do it. And I tell them, this is how way to do it, but there's choices you have to make. That's what you're selling. They're like,
Yep. So
oh,
I definitely would want to look at that in terms of like the competing metrics as well, because there is actually this survey out there that asks people if they could, land a 787 Dreamliner if all the pilots suddenly died or whatever, and like 86% of men say like, "Fuck yeah, land the 787, bring it," right? And the number is much lower for women, right? 100% confident that the actual ability to land the 787 is the same between all genders. I wouldn't want the overconfidence of so there can actually be a good effect of lowering confidence.
and my trouble is that when you lower confidence, you always keep in the workplace, learning people in the workplace. What they do is they just don't have their voices as much decisions. You can get this very irony when most of the air groups are the ones whose decision period is late.
I love that as a comment, and I haven't thought about that in terms of this program, but it is part of like ABET requirements for engineering ethics that communication be one of the skills that's taught. I kind of knocked that out of my mind early on because I'm like, I don't think we can also be teaching writing in computing classes, whatever. But I'm not here to implement Keltsian ethics in your classes or whatever. So if you wanted to work on that, there's actually our lesson plans, et cetera, that ABET accredited engineering departments have used. And
I would be happy if my students' confidence in their ability to make their technical choice went down, but their confidence in technical choice being a hard choice that everyone should be on went up.
Yeah.
So they walk into say, obviously, you should just do this and say, no, there's no ethics at all. You should think about it.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether they were types of them, very happy to walk into that around. They're doing it because they're walking through, I'm not sure if it's because of the lot of this, I don't say.
Yeah.
And that part is the part of
So the communications lessons in this case do actually work on not just are you forming a good paragraph or whatever, but are you confident in your skill to work within, say, a meeting setting or whatever, to state your opinion, sway people to your opinion. And one of the experiences I've frequently had as an ethics professor is that students are always coming to me and saying, this just isn't relevant to my life, right? And I didn't know at all what to do about that, right? For 10 years or something, I all of a sudden turned like earnest, right? And I was like, but it really is like, you need to think about how you might face this choice, right? And then at one point, my 11-year-old nephew was learning fractions in school. And I'm out barbecuing in my backyard and he's tagging along or whatever, wants to tell his uncle stuff. And he's like, yeah, I'm learning about fractions, but like, when am I ever going to use this in life? And my first thing, I was going to turn to him and be like, Alex, like, anytime tuna fish is 3 for $7 at the grocery store or whatever. But I turned to him and I was like, well, you'll see, won't you? And so I think it is going to be the experience that a lot of people are going to state that irrelevance objection, but you were in their ear years before they had to activate your lesson. I had students write back to me from jobs in DC back when I was at George Washington University saying, Kelts, you'll never guess it. I was in this interview at Department of Labor or something like that. And this person learned that I had studied political philosophy and we had a conversation about John Rawls. You'll never guess. It became relevant, even just to that conversation. Well, yeah, no, I knew. Well, let's talk further about how I could address some of those.
I wonder if you have thoughts about the elephant in the room in any of these states. You want to build ethically aware computer scientists, and yet call it a non-trivial fraction of our students are perfectly gladly willing to not be ethical in their own right in our courses. Walking in with every intent to use ChatGPT or something like it to solve the problems and escape from our courses. Is there, I understand professional ethics is, as a academic topic is different than personal ethics, but I wonder if there's something that can be embedded, can be said that these lessons are not just for when they escape out into their jobs, but rather as they're approaching their coursework itself.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that integrated ethics kind of embeds here and is successful here in this CS department. But I've been thinking a lot over the course of the past year that even as, along with Marcel and Arvind and so many others, I developed a lot of these ideas. Now, all of a sudden, we actually have to talk to SPIA students as well, because they're going to be able to get ChatGPT to write Python code for them to do data analysis and other implementations. So now all of a sudden it kind of like needs to go wider. And I think that about that, one reason that students are sometimes resistant or might express that they don't care about ethics at all is that they have a particular conception of what ethics is. Ethics is this thing where I really want to do X, and some is telling me I can't do X. A pastor, a priest, a vice principal, right? I hated my vice principal, right? Because they were the person there to tell you couldn't do that, right? And so you walk straight into, the strafing fire or whatever, if you walk in to an ethics lesson with like, I'm going to tell you the principles of what you should aspire to, right? But to the extent that we really actually integrate into other assignments here, and to the extent that we're really asking students, there are competing ways to look at privacy. How would you look at it? How would you discuss it with your peers? How would you make a technical choice about it as a team, right? I think that resistance, or the idea that I'm going to do whatever it takes to make a buck or whatever, kind of goes away, and they start to actually think of it as, here's the best implementation of how I'm going to make a buck. Does that make sense?
I just feel like you can't, a lot of things, you can't get students to ethically follow the rules. And.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Disregard. I think this is more than the vice principal issue. This is just, I'm just not gonna follow the rules. And I think that's an ethical choice. I mean, there's no law against it. I mean, I guess you can get caught and get a 0 or probation. Not a legal issue, but it's certainly an ethical issue. They make that choice whether they're going to use ChatGPT to solve a problem or they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I feel like at least from 126, it's like one of the most serious ethical issues that we don't have an answer to.
Mhm.
And we just don't know what happened. And so, like, how do we teach them ethics about, and I think a lot of these things are awesome, but we want them to be ethical with themselves.
So, I mean, most of what I know about the ethics of academic honesty suggests that academic honesty is kind of a three-legged stool, right? And that the incentive to cheat has to come along with a certain weakness of will, and that weakness of will may come about because they're rushing on an assignment or whatever. But the third leg of the stool is opportunity, right? That they actually do have access to their roommate's computer, and their roommate took course whatever last semester, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what ChatGPT has pulled out is the opportunity leg, or it's made that leg stronger or something like that. It's
made that leg really strong.
Right. And so I think that behaviorally, the effect that you're seeing is almost entirely on the opportunity side.
I used to, on the first day we talked about on our per se, I'm looking around and nobody in this class is planning to cheat their way through the course. But, you know, you're gonna get desperate when you get behind, when something's hard for the first time ever, when all of these things, and you'll, you know, be tempted to make bad decisions. Please come and talk to me. You know, we can work things out before you cross that line. And these days, I don't think I can honestly say that. I think on the first day of class, there are, I don't know, a quarter, half of the students who are actively thinking, I'm going to use ChatGPT to cheat my way through this course. Maybe it's
Yeah.
just that one leg of the three-legged stool is so strong that it can stand up to everything. But I think there is something else there that you know, desire or pressure and panic cause of cheating seems not be a thing. There are students who are actively like, yeah, I plan to do this.
I've been thinking about this a little bit, and I have a theory that's consistent with what you were describing, Christopher. I think that there's some aspect of this has to do with kind of a social. There's sort of a perception of we're in this together. We all have an agreement not to cheat. Like maybe this is sort of like let's say 15 years ago, 10 years ago at Princeton, there was kind of generally this feeling among students that we all agree, we're all here to learn, we all agree not to cheat. That kind of was I feel like that's my impression, that there was this sort of feeling and sort of like a social construction and I think that possibly that's been broken. And it might be related to like, I look around and I can see everybody else is cheating, so why shouldn't I? You know, that I think this is, you know, I'm sure this is something that studied.
Well, let's work on it. Like I said, like what I presented, I'm not here to implement Keltian ethics in your department. If that's a problem that you guys are facing, then let's work on it. I can think about it this summer. Arvin and I have talked, he's had his run-in with virtue ethicists before, but there is a personal excellence approach to this as well. I've said to a couple of students, I was a runner in college, a distance runner, right? Proudest days of my life, being a failure on the track. And in that sport, you can actually look at, in black and white, you can look at your time, and I knew exactly how much I would get my ass kicked at the Olympics, like exactly, right? But I didn't therefore like sit in my room on some afternoon and say, I'm gonna hire somebody to do my miles for me this afternoon. You know, it was important that I did it myself, that I be exactly as bad as I was on my own. So that gives me some instinct that if it's not just an opportunity thing, and that if it is an ethics thing or a social environment thing, you also suggested, everyone is cheating around me, that there could be interventions that you could get to convincing students, like, you're going to be exactly the programmer you are going to be. You're going to make that excellence come into existence. Nobody can do those miles for you. The track analogy won't work with them, but
Rules are not the same. Yeah. There's social contracts between the people and the students basically buying. And specifically with ChatGPT, you're running into the problem where they're going to require to use it to the graduate. To require that they don't before they graduate takes a very large amount of reasoning to understand why you go from this part their info, why their practices are wrong. It's like telling students the thing, the fact that you're basically all get through it. But you haven't learned how to teach them the lesson that they're going to understand what they're using their responsibly without banning the eye of teaching them the lessons. And that's hard to explain to students.
Funny that you use this exact same analogy, having a second grader, this makes it a really easy analogy to make. And inevitably, when I talk to students about this, they're like, oh, of course you shouldn't let your kid use the calculator, and of course your kid needs to learn the multiplication table. No, I don't understand why in our 1 and 200 level courses we can't use that. There's some disconnect there.
I'm not sure it's the same.
I don't know that it's the same as calculator.
Well, you said, I thought that's what,
I know that's what students think.
oh, that's, okay, fair enough.
I know students think
Yeah.
calculator is something cheating.
And
Yeah.
look, I think there's a role for it, I'm not against it. But, when, the rules of engagement are given. And I think there should be a social contract, if I agree with you. That's an educational approach, not a technology approach.
As opposed to just don't care about the job.
And we're gonna get into industry, it's worse. My daughter-in-law was on a task force that was supposed to study the medical software, the use of AI. And their task force came up with a huge number of reasons why, based on the current data set, it would not be good because it would be, well, there would be underrepresented groups that would not be diagnosed properly, and there would be, plus there's all of the power usage, the idea that it's not at this point environmentally sustainable for large scale use. And the company basically said, that's not the answer we wanted you to come out with. And threw out the task force report.
Yeah, just saying, those are the current two important units. So, I think it's wrong to assessing the crisis of, rules that the students between back 15 years that would just let them cheat. I think it really the severe disconnect in the world they're about to go.
so on the system complexity thing, that is one of the things that we want to make students aware of heading out, so at least they're not surprised when their boss says, do it over. I wanted you to deliver answer X or whatever. And they may have at least thought during their college education about how they would surmount that. I had at various different times in the past, I've had a life outside of Princeton as a curriculum consultant. And this is just a suggestion. I don't know what you'll think of it, right? But there is actually an approach out there that I've used called decoding the disciplines. And I've only done it with humanities and social science. And what that approach does is actually, it disambiguates the intellectual skill and the reasoning process that the discipline is actually based upon from whatever evidence that you would have of that reasoning skill, right? So that when we ask for written assignments over on that side of the campus, yeah, we're grading a piece of writing, but we're taking it to be evidence of the reasoning skill, the process and the method, right? But most of us weren't even actually taught to express method, right? We might be able to vaguely say like, yeah, I do, ordinary language analysis in philosophy or whatever, but we weren't even really taught that method. So it's a reflective process through which a scholar can go to kind of disambiguate the method, the skills, the reasoning processes themselves from the performance of it. And then actually they can find ways to assess the methods, the skills, the reasoning process, et cetera, absent the traditional assessment metric, which would be lines of code in this case, or a paper. And but I'm not sure it would work because I'm just suggesting it or whatever, but it has worked in social sciences and humanities instances.
So in an ideal 100 to 200 level classes have got integrated curriculum. And they will need to curriculum to their students are coming out of having those lovely class. They've really been, their eyes have been opened, and now they're going to come my classes, the 100 level classes. So in the ideal world, what's the role of integrated ethics? Two of them, so to speak, given that students will have seen integrated ethics 101 and 4. Should I do the same things or should I do different things? Based on where I am.
Can I make a meta comment? Part of me is like, I'm not going to walk into somebody's department and talk about their curriculum on the whole, because those are the most explosive. This is a meta comment, right? Those are the most explosive discussions. So part of me wants to just be like, whatever you'd like to implement in your class is, right?
So you got, I'm actually rejecting them.
Okay.
And as far as I know, I don't answer any more about what goes in it. And so,
But if we were off the record, what's my vision? Should I like take the microphone off? What's my vision? My vision would be that there's some sort of plan to see to it that over the course of the different levels, they are actually encountering all 5 steps in the ethical reasoning process at some point. And then my vision would also be, and they do this at Utah as well and other places, that when they refer to a standalone course, they actually mean a course which is specifically about the social problems of computing, and all of the homeworks and assessments in any way are about using this technical skills to, right? So think of that as standalone capstone, right? So that, again, we're like, off the record, but my vision would be some way in which all 5 of these are occurring, and then, maybe a capstone experience where it all comes together. And so if I were,
one has to come in every class because we always have different technologies to think about.
yeah, that's right. So that, and I have thought of, I do think of this in terms of what's best earliest in the career. So 400 level is not necessarily going to be over there. It's going to be on some of these steps.
Sure.
But like, I love the example at 125 of the contrast and the web accessibility guidelines.
Mhm.
Could that be like one? Is that a label case? Kind of just try to understand.
Yeah, good question. It actually, in some ways, that actually was jumping all the way to 4, right? But another way to think of that is it's 4, but it's not quite there. It's because if you thought about, say, in Matt's class or whatever, if you thought about the ideal for an integrated ethics class, for a standalone technical class, if you thought about the ideal, they would have an array of skills available to them. And so actually the choice of which way to debias a data set or something like that, or the choice of which way to attack some fair ML problem would now be something that they could use an array of skills to work on. So the way in which that is different is it's like, well, it's still a conditionals assignment, right? And they're still being told exactly what that is and exactly what the code for doing it. Well, maybe not the code or whatever, but they're still being told exactly the same things, even if it had been an abstract assignment. But now they are seeing that it is attached to a social purpose. Yeah. Right. Or like in the Utah graph search assignment, it's just it is the same assignment that they otherwise would have given, but now it's a question of not a traveling salesman or whatever, but of I think the person's name is Bob, and Bob can't be too far, Bob has a kidney ailment and can't be too far away from a hospital at any given time. The hospitals capable of treating Bob were he to have an emergency are only in cities 1, 3, and 5, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's like the dynamics, I would work with somebody on that, but the dynamics of it, the actual compute problem is the same.
Well, math course is pretty big.
How big is that course?
300 some, I think it was, just close to 300, yeah.
That's incredible, not really. That must be what we're doing.
Yeah. And I will be honest, because, you know, limitations is part of the talk as well. We had an assessment plan, we had a rubric, we had advice to his graders. Didn't quite work the way we expected, right? So that is something we're going to encounter. To, you know, it worked on the whole for that many students, but it's got to work better, right? The role plays, I would say, are ideal in a room of 50. Everything else is scalable, except maybe a small class is best for having students engage in debate. That's one way of talking about competing principles, not the only way. We did it in a scaled way in 125 too. That's a small class. Right. But the way we assessed it.
My perception is very high. I think the store.
Yeah. But the way we assessed it in 125 was scalable or whatever, because it was not, it was.
That have them use these definitions to like argue both ways on definition.
Right, paragraph.
Yeah, it was one, it's like, it's one of those that are time consuming. It's like, yeah, like to the extent that the design questions are.
Yeah, they're not so scalable.
Yeah.
I mean, there are limits, but I think like if we're as like similar to grading design questions. 1, 2, 6.
Yeah, and it's my favorite clip ever on a podcast that I've been a part of is I was interviewed on one podcast, and I used a line that I use with people to try to convince them that ethics isn't that hard. You shouldn't think of it as a barrier, and et cetera, et cetera. And I said on this podcast, ethics has a friendly face. But you might have noticed, and if you've known me for a long period of time, I'm not always dynamic in the front of a room. I kind of tend to have the resting on happy face problem. And actually in this clip of me online, I'm like, ethics has a friendly face. I look like pissed, right? I'm like, shit, that line didn't work. Not in that instance. But what I'm saying is, I'm not recommending that anybody implement anything in their class that is not suited to the challenges that they have, right? So the question here is to look at the many methods that we've piloted, the many things that are being done across the country, and for me to scale fit to exactly what could work in your classroom. And if that's something small, right? In Bob's class, I was actually only working with one of the students on each 4-person development team. That's cool, right? Because they might have a discussion about it as a team, and at least one of the students had a meeting with me about the ethical impact assessment, right? Whatever's reasonable within their workload, within the hours that you have with them, et cetera, et cetera. And hopefully that's not nothing, but. So ethics has a friendly face.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here again.
Here's your try to do next semester.
Yeah.
I'm a project-based class.
You're what?
I'm a project-based